Welcome to the March edition of the Would-Be NMRA Clinic. We have a double feature tonight. We have John Wilbert, who lives here at Central Would-Be. He's going to give us a presentation on some prototype equipment that he has restored and placed on his property, which looks very nice. And then our second presentation tonight is going to be Al Frasch, who used to be the owner of the Pilchuck division of the BNSF layout, which was down in Freeland that many folks operated on over the years. We've moved on from that. Now he's down in Arizona and has a new layout that he's going to share with us tonight.
Thanks, Rich. And for those of you that have attended Skagit Would-Be clinics in Oak Harbor in the past, you may recall back in 2016, I did a short what I did over the summer presentation on my restoration and installation of a 3-color trackside signal. Since I like things that actually do something, I added an electronic controller that receives a signal from a driveway motion detector I installed that causes the signal head to sequence from green to red, and 30 seconds later it changes to orange, and 30 seconds after that it changes back to green, all automatically when someone comes down the driveway. It was a lot of fun, and in doing this project, I kind of got bit by the restoration bug, but it took me a few years to decide what to do next. See, part of the problem, it seems, at least to me, is that most of the one-to-one scale railroad equipment for sale is located in the Midwest. So when I found something that looked like it might be fun to work on, it was a long way from Whidbey Island. Now, if I was retired, I might be inclined to take a road trip, my truck and flatbed trailer to get some of this stuff. But alas, I am not, so I can't. So I have to look for equipment that can be shipped via UPS or by common freight carrier, which is how I received this 3-light signal head strapped to a pallet. I never thought I'd be lucky enough to find something locally. However, I came across a switch stand on a website called discoverlivesteam.com. This site has an interesting collection of full-size equipment from signal heads, old headlights, steam injectors, to smaller live steam equipment and model railroad items. It even currently has a 1,500 horsepower Jeep 7 for sale for $90,000 if you're interested. And it's only down in Oregon, so it's nearby. As I inspected the switch stand, I noticed that the seller indicated that they were in the Seattle area. So I sent him a message. Yahoo, it turns out he lives in Port Townsend. By the way, he was also advertising this one on eBay, which is where this picture came from, for slightly more due to the eBay commissions. I asked the seller if he would sell the switch stand without the lamp, which he said yes. And because the price he wanted for both was more than I wanted to spend, and I had seen lamps for sale on eBay for less. And if he'd take less if I paid in cash, which he agreed to that too. So I took a trip over the peninsula to pick it up, and that's when I found out just how heavy these things are. They're made entirely of cast iron. Thankfully, the seller had already moved the upper post and target. Even so, the base assembly must have weighed about 125 pounds. It was all the two of us we could do to get it lifted in the back of my car. The upper post and target itself must have weighed another 50 pounds. So once I had the switch stand home and I started searching for a lamp on eBay, it didn't take too long to find an Adlake lamp that was in pretty good shape for a good price. Then one day, my saved eBay search for switch stands popped up with another device that looked intriguing. But I'll talk about this one a little later. Just in case you're curious, yes, the 112E switch stand is still being made, albeit in Austria. The description to the right is direct from the Voestalpine webpage. I thought it was interesting that not only do they make the E, which is the model I have, but they also make a G, which positions the operator perpendicular to the track. Why you'd want to do that, I'm not so sure, but they make them that way. So I don't have a picture of the stand prior to starting the disassembly, but here it is lying on my shop floor, partially disassembled, with the handle and head block removed. As I mentioned previously, the target post had been removed by the seller. That bar is solid cast iron. The finial on top is where the signal lamp sits on. The entire mechanism was frozen by many years of rust, so getting the handle assembly off was a major feat and required many days of soaking the top shaft with penetrating oil. I finally had to use some tree felling wedges to pry the handle head block up and off the square shaft. I then had to soak the main shaft bearing surfaces top and bottom with more oil. And then once I removed the locking ring at the bottom and using a small sledgehammer, I was able to pound the shaft out the bottom of the frame. So before I can proceed further, I need to add that this project required the purchase of a media blast cabinet, as I believe all good projects deserve a purchase of a new tool. In this case, I acquired a Harbor Freight cabinet, but then proceeded to add considerable number of enhancements to improve its functionality. There are many YouTube videos on various mods, and I'd be happy to discuss offline with anyone interested in learning more about my experience with this part of the project. By the way, it's called media blasting instead of sand blasting, as sand isn't used. That's because the fine silica dust created by using sand is very hazardous to your lungs. Let's get back to the topic at hand. Here is the first item I blasted, the finial for the signal lamp. While it looks like a reflection, the left side is clean bare metal, while the right side is the original rusted state of the metal. Here is the target being blasted inside the cabinet. Media blasting is very effective at removing rust and old paint, and then leaving a slightly rough finish perfect for painting. I used an 80 grit garnet media for this work. Here's the handle assembly after blasting and ready for a coat of paint. This too was quite heavy. Maneuvering it inside my blast cabinet was quite a challenge. Note the small ring with a depressed center on the side of the head block. I believe this may be some type of access for greasing the upper bearing surface. I decided to bring that to current technology by removing the ring and drilling and tapping the hole for a 1/4-inch Zerk grease fitting. I have a picture of that later on. Unfortunately, the center shaft and the base frame could not fit inside my blast cabinet, so I had to handle these differently. For the shaft, the corrosion was so heavy that I had to get out my 4-inch grinder to get down to the base metal. The square portion on the left is where the handle head block attaches. Just below the square section and right above the bottom are 2 smooth bearing surfaces that were rusted to the frame. The 1/4-inch hole you see is for a pin that holds a support ring. This ring keeps the shaft from falling through the bottom of the frame when the handle assembly is removed. The larger threaded hole at the bottom is where a very large screw eye threads in and is used to connect the rotating shaft to the linkage going to the switch points. Since the base also would not fit in my blast cabinet, I acquired another tool, this time a portable blasting gun with a handheld media container. I used a very coarse 60 grit crushed slag to get through the heavy corrosion. Thankfully, I just happened to have replaced my water heater a month before, and I kept the box, as it worked out great as a shield and containment device. That, along with a drop cloth, was used to contain the media. It turned out to be pretty effective, but I still managed to get the slag particles everywhere, including all over myself. Here's what the frame looked like after blasting and then primed and painted. Note that the 2 steps on each side of the frame. This is an unusual feature not seen on most switch stands. These are used by the signal maintainers to reach the signal lamps for nightly maintenance. These steps become important when we realize the signal lamp is about 7 feet above the ties the switch stand sits on. So here's the completed switch stand. I decided to paint the target green, and in hindsight, it should have been painted red or yellow like the original target color. Maybe next year I'll change it. Here's a close-up of where you can see the Zerk fitting installed on the handle head block. You can also notice that I replaced all of the hardware that attaches the signal lamp finial to the target post and the target post to the main shaft with stainless steel nuts, bolts, and washers. Not exactly prototypical, but it will make for future maintenance a lot easier with this northwest rainy weather. The 2 square head bolts holding the metal target are also stainless steel, but are blackened. I found them on Amazon and thought they looked good and were a good match to the square-headed bolts used originally. Next up is the Ad Lake signal lamp. It was actually in pretty good shape, but I decided that blasting a fresh coat of paint was in order, so everything had to come off. Here are the 4 color reflectors or backgrounds ready to blast. At first, I was thinking of leaving them as is for a well-used look, but since I was completely refinishing everything else, they would have stood out. Plus, they needed some pounding out to remove the dents. And here are the rings that hold the backgrounds and the Fresnel color lenses in place. They were in pretty good shape as well, but a quick blast and a coat of paint was in order. On the left is the chimney after some initial media blasting, and on the right is the lamp frame ready to blast. Thankfully, the frame didn't have much damage, just some rust and chipped paint that my trusty blast cabinet could take care of. Prior to blasting the frame, I drilled a 1/2-inch hole in the bottom plate to route an electric cable for a low voltage light. Here's what the original oil lamp burner and chimney insert look like. The burner is in amazing shape given the age of the signal lamp. The glass is intact and there is even a wick still in the burner. Since I have no intention of using an oil lamp, I need to find a solution to mount a light bulb inside the lamp housing. And here's what I came up with. I needed a way to mount a 12-volt bulb at the exact center of the Fresnel lenses, so I made a base out of a half-inch acrylic or clear acrylic and drilled it for a standard lamp nipple to which I attached a bayonet socket. Here's a look at the new bulb holder inside the lamp housing after it was blasted and painted, wired up and ready to go. The notch in the base allows for the cable to enter via a grommet in the bottom plate. Here's the lamp chimney after blasting and repainting. And here are the repainted backgrounds and the mounting rings. I purchased the rubber gaskets shown here to cushion the lenses against the lamp housing prior to installing the backgrounds and securing rings. But they were too bulky and that they did not allow the rings to properly clamp down on the lenses and the backgrounds. So instead, I tried a few other sizes of large O-rings I purchased on eBay, shown to the left of the lamp housing, but they didn't work either. So after some thought and input from my wife, I decided to just use some clear adhesive caulk. Here you can see me in the process of mounting the lens. After the caulk cures, I then place the appropriate color background over the lens and tighten the ring down to hold everything in place. And yes, stainless steel screws were used here too. Note the color of the lenses on the table. These are the green lenses, but yet they look blue to the naked eye as they color correct for the yellow color out of the old oil lamp flame. So I figure it's important to use an incandescent bulb, not an LED bulb, to ensure that the color looks green when I'm done. Here is how the lamp looked when fully assembled. So now that the switch stand has been restored and the signal lamp has been restored, I decided these things needed to actually do something fun besides just light up. This is where this device comes in. I believe this is called a switch position indicator. By the way, if there are any actual signal maintainers on the call tonight, let me know if this is called something else. It's made by G&B Specialties. From what I've been able to determine, this device is used to tell the monitoring circuits which position a switch is in. And like so many other things, like a new model of a car, for instance, once you know about it, it pops up everywhere you look. And in pictures, you might never have noticed it before. One interesting observation is that the switch position indicators always seem to be attached to the switch points using a control rod that is separate from the switch stand linkage, as shown in these pictures. I'm assuming that is so if the switch stand or motor has a problem, the true position of the switch is always indicated. Here's what one of these things looks like on the inside. There are 4 cams that operate 4 sets of single pole double throw contacts. I say 4 sets because each cam can be adjusted separately, a feature I take advantage of, as you will see later. But first I need to completely disassemble it and clean it and then repaint it. So I begin by removing the switch assembly and then the 4 cams by removing the camshaft. The casting had an exterior broken mounting tab on the lower right that I had re-welded by a neighbor who happens to be a professional welder. Here's the casting after a visit to my blasting cabinet. It still needs another visit though to complete the cleaning. The unit was missing one of the cable access covers, presumably left on the wiring harness when it was removed from service. I made a duplicate out of some 16 gauge steel I had on hand. Here's the switch assembly it looked like after I removed it from the casting. I completely disassembled it and cleaned each part. I had to be careful though because the electrical contacts were tinned and I didn't want to remove the coating. Here's a picture of the entire position indicator with all of its parts cleaned and painted and ready for reassembly. I replaced the Zerk fittings for the camshaft bearings and I polished the steel camshaft. I also drilled and tapped the end of the camshaft for a stainless steel hex drive bolt to facilitate the mounting of a control rod you will see later. The cams are shown to the right of the picture. The threaded bolts in the lower right are used to adjust the cams to ensure the switch closure occurs exactly the right position relative to the switch points. Here's the switch assembly being reassembled. You can see how the electric wipers connect to the terminals on the other side of the mounting block. The bearing rollers and the crescent-shaped brackets right along the edge of the cams as they rotate and pivot to make or break the electrical contacts. And here's the unit fully reassembled. In case you're interested, here is what a contemporary version of this thing looks like. From what I can tell, it looks like they added some spring tensioners on the electrical contacts to ensure a positive connection. And also you can notice here how the cams can be independently adjusted to affect the timing of the switch contacts. Now, earlier I mentioned these set of switch points can be adjusted. This is accomplished by turning the screws that are seen on the cams to the right of the camshaft. By turning the screws, the cams rotate around the shaft, changing the switch point timing. The bolts on the left of the camshaft are used to tighten down the cams once they're adjusted. So I did indeed adjust 2 of the cams, top and the third one down, about 15 degrees ahead of the other 2. It's subtle, but noticeable. If you notice closely, I have a metal U-channel control arm at the bottom of the picture moved to the right, which moves the camshaft counterclockwise, resulting in all of the electrical switch points thrown to the right. Now, with the control arm moving the shaft counter or clockwise through the center position, 2 of the switch points, the top and the third one down, are already thrown to the left. Now, with the control arm moving all the way to the left, all 4 sets of points have moved to the left as well. So I thought if I wire 2 of those single point or single pole switches in series using opposite contacts, I will have a momentary completed electrical circuit as the position indicator moves from one position to the other. So now that I have a switch stand, a signal lamp, and a position indicator, what to do with it all? How many of you have one of these hanging on a wall in your layout room or shop? This is one of those clocks that plays a short railroad soundbite each time it strikes the top of the hour. It does so with the help of a small electronic module that uses a momentary switch contact to trip the player, and it runs on 2 1.5 volt AA batteries. What if I deconstructed the clock to get to the electronic module? But first I needed someplace to mount everything together. So I acquired a single railroad tie from Home Depot and cut it in half using my chainsaws. I only wanted 4-foot lengths. By the way, I thought the impressions left from the tie plates gave it an authentic look. And yes, this is quite heavy too. And so I negotiated a spot in the front yard with my facilities manager. My idea was to place the yard art close enough to our front steps that a visitor might be so inclined to actually try throwing the switch lever. Well, the first step was to dig a trench across the front steps so that I could run an electrical conduit to the low voltage lighting terminal box in the yard. As you can see, the conduit coming up next to where the front tie will be located. And then I ran a cable to the outdoor in-ground audio speaker I placed about 15 feet away. I suspect you see where I'm going with all this now. I then began mounting my equipment, starting with the position indicator. I used black liquid tight flex conduit to give a more industrial look. The flex conduit connects to the conduit in the ground that you saw in the previous picture. By the way, I had to special order the black conduit. I tried painting the gray stuff, but that doesn't work very well. The paint never seemed to cure properly and it scratches off easily. What is not easy to see from this vantage point is the speaker wire that I ran earlier also comes up in a short length of flex conduit that also connects to the conduit T. And those are the speaker and 12 volt lighting wires coming out of the T, waiting to be fed into the position indicator box. But let me show you what it looks like inside. Here's the position indicator looks like with the electronic module from the clock installed. The module is only about 1 inch long, so it's kind of hard to see behind the wires. The push button on the right allows for manual tripping of the sound module. I installed 2 D-cell batteries instead of the original AA's so they will last longer. And voila, here's the final project. The working switch stand, the signal lamp, and the position indicator with the audio speaker in the background. And yes, I had to assemble the switch stand in place. It was all I could do to move the switch stand base with just the shaft installed by myself. Once in place on the ties, I added the handle and head block assembly, and then the target mounting post, the target itself, and then the signal lamp on top. If I were to guess, I'd say the whole assembly weighs north of 200 pounds. The signal lamp bulb is connected to my 12 volt front yard lighting circuit, so it comes on at night. Here's a close-up of how the switch stand is set up. You can see the black pipe that connects the switch stand to the position indicator control rod. You can also see the 2 conduits coming out of the position indicator box. The upper conduit has a cable connected to it that goes up to the signal lamp. The lower conduit is for the audio output to the speaker and the 12 volt power in for the signal lamp bulb. And yes, those are some railroad spikes I had lying around to hold the switch stand to the ties. I thought they looked good here. but actually they're just more decorative than functional, as I drilled 1/2-inch holes prior to pounding them in. I used a couple of lag screws that do the actual work of holding the switch stand to the ties. This is a close-up of the switch stand shaft eye bolt and the clevis rod linkage. The threading the eye in or out will change how far the linkage moves relative to the shaft rotation. And here's a short video, hopefully with sound, of the switch stand in action. I apologize if you could not hear it here. It's actually quite loud in person. By the way, you can probably notice the rust has already appeared in the 7 months it's been in place. So in addition to being some cool functional yard art, it has become a fun and interesting conversation point with family and friends. Although I do have to encourage folks to actually throw the handle the first time. But once they do, they are hooked and do it every time they come to visit. And yes, this is an example of my sense of humor. I hope this was interesting. Does anybody have any questions?
That's amazing, John. That was a great presentation.
That's the amount of work involved in restoration is just incredible. Makes me feel guilty when I look at my switch stand out in the driveway and I haven't even started to do this much restoration work. Holy cow.
It was a lot of fun, I have to admit.
Yeah. Here's something that hit me that not very many people would notice. I heard you say clevis.
Yes.
And I've been working on some switch throw rodding on my layout, and I called it a clevis, and I had a fellow model railroader just climb all over me. You dummy, why are you pronouncing it clevis? It's clevis. And I go,
oh, could be. I mispronounce stuff all the time. Yeah, it could be clevis. Yeah,
hey,
you're probably right.
Going together with clevis.
Yeah, no, I mispronounce stuff all the time, so could be wrong there.
How do you keep track of all those little parts going back together?
I took pictures.
Okay.
Yeah.
I looked at that and thought, I don't know if I could remember how it all went back together.
Yeah, that was part of the fun. Yeah, the switch stand is only like 5 parts, so it wasn't a big deal. But that position indicator, yeah, there were a lot of parts. And it took some time to get it all cleaned up and back together again.
It looks great. I can't wait to come to your house and throw that switch.
There you go. Thank you.
So the interior to the electric switches, was that wood?
You talking about the position indicator? No, it's all metal.
Oh, it looked like wood. Did you just paint it a different color?
I'm thinking of what you were thinking of. There was a wood block where the electrical contacts were. Maybe that's what you're thinking of.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. So
yeah, it's like Bakelite. It's like a
micarta?
Bakelite. Yeah, exactly.
Micarta block.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that has the screw terminals on it. Yeah.
So what kind of paint do you use? Do you brush paint or do you spray
No, it's
paint?
all spray enamel. Yeah. Spray can, rattle can.
It's like Krylon stuff.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Yeah.
I restored a 1968 Cub Cadet garden tractor, and it's all cast iron frame. And anyway, I was using I wasn't using the good media stuff. I was using the silica sand out in my front yard and trying to keep that out from going down in my clothes and trying to not get it in my throat. And anyway, I'm probably going to die because I did that project, but it's really messy. I didn't have the benefit of a media spray booth.
It really helps for the smaller stuff. When I did the items outdoors in my using my water heater box, I actually had a full face shield hood over the top of me, so my face was protected. My clothing wasn't, so the shirt pocket and stuff all got full of media, but I protected my eyes and lungs by the face mask. That helped.
All I can say is, dang, now I want one.
There you go. Save your pennies. The hardest part, as I said, is finding them. Because I said that they're in Kentucky or Indiana or Ohio. That seems to where all this stuff is. Anyway, Rich, turn it back to you.
All right, thanks, John. That was great. And he also it shows that you put a lot of effort into the presentation with some good pictures while you were assembling stuff. Some people forget to do that with their projects, take a lot of pictures so they can, do clinics or just show off their work later on. So great job on that.
Thank you.
Okay, Al Frasch is up next to talk about his new layout in Arizona, where he now lives. For most folks, it would probably take them several years to do what Al does, and he probably did it in about 6 months. So Al, you're up.
Okay. Modesto Empire Traction and Inscale, and I still consider myself a part of the clinic. I just not in the state anymore. And this is a picture of the 70 tonners I use, and Gary Jordan was good enough to paint and decal 2 of them for me. I really appreciate that. Some of you might not have seen this before. In 2004, I started digging out the rest of my basement and having it concreted in. And then I finished it, did bench work, and 3 years later, I had a layout and started doing operations. And this lasted until 2018 when it had to come out. If you haven't seen the layout before, it was fairly decent sized. It was 800 square feet. There's the infamous sewer pipe that Sue was able to fit under quite easily. It looked like this in diagram form, lower and upper. Sound Rail 2018 March, we had a final session, and there was John and Rich and some other guys from around the country and Canada. It was a good sending off. It had to go. So the very night after that last session, this is what it looked like. And everything had to go out. That opening became a window, and all the stuff had to go out that window. And all got carried into a 40-yard dump. And at that point, I had 2 weeks to get the whole thing, all the holes patched and everything like that, and painted so that the new owner could take over. And it all fit in that 140-yard dump. So some people ask, why would you go to Arizona? Why Tucson? If you remember my driveway, it was very steep, and I had to always come out and scrape the snow off of it, or I was stuck. This was a picture last Christmas. I think that explains why I moved. So, Modesto Empire Traction. Modesto Empire Traction is a small 5-mile-long switching district that runs from Modesto to Empire in the Central Valley. And when I was at the Sacramento Convention in 2011, I took a prototype tour down there. And I said, geez, this would be a great place to build a layout of, but I would require a huge building to do that. So obviously, that wasn't going to happen. So I had to shrink it down a whole lot. If you're not familiar with the area, Modesto is right along 99, goes right down through the valley, and Empire is on the other end, hence Modesto and Empire. The traction was from the 20s when they first started out. They have no traction, of course, now, but that's the name of it. This whole area in the middle is called the Beard Industrial District. They own all the land. They rent out all the buildings to different companies about, well, I'll show you a list of them in a second. And then they provide the rail service for all those businesses. So they get both the rent and they charge them for rail. That's a pretty good deal. This is a list off of their website of all the businesses that have been in their industrial district. The ones that are in the little boxes are the ones that I identified that I could model on my layout. If anybody's tried to actually do this kind of thing, you get the Google Earth view, you look down on it and they label a few of the buildings, but not all of them. So I had to go to Google Earth, TerraServer, Bing, etc. I went to about 5 different sites, and someone would highlight some buildings and some. I finally figured out where most of these were. This is one of their 70 tonners, huge train, of course. They had them in doubles or triples, usually. I only have 2 of them, but that's okay. I did find an article from 2007 by Trevor Marshall about the Modesto Empire Traction, and I used that as some information and said, I can do this, I think. I found a website called MapZen. I don't know if they're around anymore, but what they allowed me to look at is only the track, nothing else, which was super, because then I could blow this up and figure out exactly which were leading, and et cetera, where all the turnouts were and all that kind of stuff, and where the Ys were, et cetera. And this little area here, I blow up, and you can see, you know, exactly where everything was. And I could model some of those, not all of them, but some of them on the layout, because I only had, you know, a single bedroom to do this in. So layout, the prototype, it's I model about 25% of it, I figure. The era is the year 2000, and part of that is because the equipment I had from the old layout was all 1998. So I figured I could stretch it to 2000 and then get to 70 tonners. I bought 2 of them from Bachman and had Gary do the detail and paint work on it, and it works. But I also use BNSF and UP switchers. It's in a 12-foot by 10-foot bedroom, basically, plus the closet. So that's about 1/6 of the area I had before. The bench work was, there were 2-foot by 4-foot boxes with plywood and on top and on the sides. I took those from the old layout and I was able to use those again. It's all in scale, of course. It's code 80. I wasn't going to change that since I had about 5 times as much track and turnouts as I was going to need. I wasn't going to buy new stuff. So I was able to pick out the ones that I thought were the best ones and use them. I had about 300 caboose ground throws from the other layouts. So, since I'll need about 40 of them, I certainly used those. It's double deck with an elevator, and I'll explain that in a moment. It's built for operations, and it'll last from 2 to 3 hours according to how long I make the trains. And if you don't like switching, you won't like the layout, because it's 100% within yard limits. I modeled 38 industries with about 112 plus locations. And on the old layout, which was 5 times larger, I only had about 45 industries. So you can see that it's going to be crammed in there pretty tight. I'm still using Digitrax. I went up to the UT6Ds, and I have Wi-Fi if a person has smartphone apps. I'm using JMRI's Operations Pro for my switch lists. Wonderful program if you haven't used it. Since everything's in yard limits, there's no such thing as dispatching. Both crews just communicate by radio. In other words, they just talk to each other and yell at each other. And since I had 3 to 4 times as much stuff needed for the layout from the old layout, it went fairly fast. I mean, this whole thing was done in 18 months. So first thing, if it was going to be 2 decks, it had to be a helix or an elevator. But there's no way that helix was going to fit. So it had to be an elevator, if I could figure out how to do it, that is. So here's the steps I used. I removed the closet doors and the hardware from the closets. Luckily, there was no property management to have to worry about here. I could just do what I wanted. I lined the back wall of the closet with good, solid 3/4 ply to be able to fasten anything I wanted to it wherever I needed to. I installed high-quality drawer slides vertically so that the elevator would go up and down very consistently. I then found the high point, installed roadway to that location, but I made sure it was 1/2 inch above the upper level so that when it backed off the elevator, it was going down and around the curve. so that I would avoid derailments. And then I did that with the lower level. And then I counterbalanced both ends with 10-pound weight. I didn't know it was going to be 10-pound until I tried it with some old milk cartons, which I filled with water. And that weighs, water, of course, weighs about 8.6 pounds per cubic foot. I found out that milk cartons, after a while, the rope eats into them and it would fall. So I decided to go with a solid weight. So I bought a couple 10-pound barbell weights from Amazon. And then lots of tweaking, and I ended up with this. So against the wall is solid plywood. Then I installed the drawer slides. I figured 3 was enough. Then I have a sliding ramp here and the track. The track is 100% Atlas D rails. I had so many of them, I figured why not? And I kept trying it. You know what? This might work. The top level's there and the bottom level's there. And if you want much more information about this, I did write an article for N-Scale Railroading. It's issue 119. You can download it for free. So from the old layout, I had all these 2x4 foot chunks. I had about 6 or 7 of the things, I think. And then I had some 1x4 foot chunks. And all I had to do was bolt them into the wall. And then the bottom ones have 2x2s to support them. So it went fairly fast, except for the miscellaneous ones I had to redo myself. Going into the closet, therefore the elevator room, so to speak, little mouse holes had to be created. I cut this out in order to fit in a desk. The peninsula is supported by threaded rods, and that would be returned into a threaded rod later. Masonite for the backdrops. On the old layout, I used 2-inch foam, but I did feel I had enough room to afford to do that. So I found the stuff called soundboard down here. I think it's just like Homosote. So I used 1/2-inch soundboard, and it's great for holding nails. So I would suggest it for anybody to use. 4 LED fake neon bulbs. That's about it. What to do next? Well, I laid out craft paper roll on all of the bench work. And then I started using my old buildings just here and there and started drawing. That's the kind of track planning I do. I can't do it on a computer. It just doesn't make sense to me. So I just start sketching and say, hey, this will work, and hey, that'll work, et cetera, et cetera. This is the top of the peninsula, and it looks nothing like that now, but it gave me a chance to sketch it out, so to speak. The backdrop was 2 colors, you can't hardly tell here, but 2 colors of blue kind of merged together. And it looks okay, there's no clouds, but then again, it's the Central Valley and they don't have clouds, who knows? This is what it looks like in diagram form. There's a bottom level here with a bunch of bench work, more bench work in the middle, and then more bench work on the end. In between, the aisles are considered to be roads, as this shows. So on the top, Santa Fe Avenue runs along where you stand, where you walk, and Conde, et cetera, et cetera. If you look at a map of the Beard Industrial District, you'll find that this is Yosemite Avenue, and everything kind of leads off of them. And there's a Y, there was 2 Ys, and I fortunately used those. That's the only way to turn an engine, so a person can use that to turn their engines. I had a lot of buildings, but a lot of new ones had to be constructed. So I had to construct about a dozen buildings. And if you haven't done this, going to Google Earth, getting pictures of them and kind of guessing on the measurements and stuff, you can do a fairly decent job of making something that looks sort of like it. So here's Dawn Foods, and that's Google Earth's form, and that's mine. It's good enough for me. The roofs are basically screenshots, screen grabs of Google Earth from the top, printed on cardstock, and then glued to the top of the roof. This is one nice large building. And again, you can get an idea of the of the structure of the building and the size and et cetera, et cetera. And this is my version of it. So a tour of the layout. And if this gets kind of going too fast, just yell. This is the Modesto end, the UP yard. It goes around and around to the elevator, up to the top, and comes around to the BNSF yard in Empire. So here we go. There's a UP yard. The first track is where each job picks up their cars. The second and the fourth track are just holding tracks, while the third track is always used for runaround purposes. This is Maricold business there. And I'll explain why I go through all these in a second. You might recognize, those of you that remember my old layout, you might recognize some of these buildings. This is the back of Maricold with its 4 sites. There's a business here that makes electrical systems. There's a food distributor here. The reason I go through all that is I spent a long time looking at what in the world all these industries were there for. In order to set up operation system, you need to know what cars have to go there and why, and what ones come loaded, what one goes empty, et cetera, et cetera. And all that information can be fed into JMRI's Operation Pro. This is Modesto. Well, it's not really, but it's the space I had and the buildings I had. So that's my Modesto. Again, those of you from the old layout might recognize this building on the side. It was the Stanwood Amtrak stop. We're finally down to the end of the peninsula. And here's the sister warehouse for the Sierra Pacific plant that was up at the road over to Anacortes. And then looking down further, place that makes windows and et cetera, et cetera. There's the olive oil company again. This building here was the one that I put on my other layout in honor of Colin Truss. Those of you remember him, he passed away, what was that, about 12 years ago now. And I'm using it for the All Ale Britannia Brewery and Pizza Place. Also, there's a Y on each level. This is the Y on the lower level. Some of you also might recognize some of these trees. I do warn you, if you move to Arizona where it's only about 7% humidity, they dry out. They're very crispy now. They didn't used to be. So if you hold them too tightly, they kind of crumble. So I ask people not to touch them too much. This is the Riverside Yard on the bottom. There's 3 tracks here. That'll be important in a second here. The engine facility doesn't look anything like their real one, but it was the stuff I had and the only space I had, so that's okay. The 70 tonners are actually too small. So what I'm doing is I'm using Union Pacific switcher, or in this case, it's a U23, I believe, that runs from the Union Pacific yard. And I'm using a BNSF, or in this case, a BN switcher that runs from the NSF yard. I tried pairing these wonderful 70 tonners up with the other ones, and it just didn't work. They are now scenery. They're wonderful scenery, but they're scenery. Right here is the mouse hole to the lower level of the elevator. Last 6 inches of the elevator is controlled only by the electricity that comes through this switch right here. If it's not touching that, then it's not lit up, so to speak, and you don't have things dropping off. And then you just take the handle, raise it up, and on this one, the power for the last 6 inches is controlled through the barrel latch. I just figured it's metal, should work, and it actually does. So if they don't latch it, it's not powered. So hopefully things don't do the big drop to the floor. And then it comes out. As it comes out, it goes by a propane place into the yard. During the operations, since there's 2 jobs, and I'll get to that in a while, 2 jobs, they meet in the middle, so to speak. The middle is the elevator, so to speak. They'll either meet on upper level on one of these 3 track or down the bottom. And these buildings here, you can tell the roof is just printed. I was going to try to make it a little fancier, but I did one building with real parts, real lights and all that kind of stuff, and it cost about $35. These cost about 5 cents. I figured that was a better deal. Coming around, there's really no Modesto and sand and gravel in the Beard Industrial District, but I had all these Diffco cars and I love them. So I moved the Modesto and sand and gravel from the other side of Route 99 over into the district. I hope they appreciate it. The Y at the top. Ring containers, this is an important building. We'll be on the other side of it in a moment. I'll explain it. This is a look from the end. This is Gardner Road on this side, which again, the roads are actually the aisles. And Condoni is on this side. And all the switch lists and everything refer to them by the road they're on. In real life, this one would take up half the size of my room. This is the other side of the Ring technology place. It's just painted slightly different on each side. But I figure I can get away with calling this one side Del Monte and the other one Ring, because there's no way a person could see both sides at the same time. Saves a little money and space. There is, in fact, a auto distribution center at the end of the Beard Industrial District. You might recognize Tenex. Some of you might use their plastic solvents for model making. And of course, Frito-Lay, they make all your chips. And there's a small intermodal area there. The back is the BNSF yard. The first track is where a job would pick up their traffic. The second track is for cars that are held. And the third track, which you can't see, it's behind everything, is always open as a runaround. So operations. It takes 2 jobs. One starts at the UP end and goes to the BNSF, and the other does the other way around. Staging is in 3 IKEA Helmer 6-drawer cabinets that look like that. Each one of these drawers in JMRI in the Operations Pro is a stub track. When it tells me to pull something from a stub track, I just pull out the right drawer and pull out the cars. And I always do that before the people show, because I don't want them fitzing around with that stuff. Operations, again, JMRI Operations Pro. The crew is two if that person wants to work as both an engineer and conductor. Preferably it's 4, so that there's an engineer and a conductor, because the conductor has a lot of paperwork and planning to do. So it's best to have 4 people. With me, that's 5 in the room, and that's totally as much as you can get in that room. So it takes from 2 to 2.5 hours if the people are experienced, and otherwise it could take 3.5, 4, 5 hours. I had one group in here that after 3.5 hours, they still only finished half of it. I can adjust how long it takes in Operations Pro by saying how long the maximum train can be. If it's shorter trains, shorter session, longer trains, longer session. This is an example of a switch list off of JMRI. And you notice on my layout, I have space for clipboards, because I hate having people put things on my layout. So what I did is I put screw heads raised up a bit on all sides, and you can slam this clipboard in and it won't bulldoze my buildings. From JMRI Operations Pro, this is how they come out. The first thing is it tells you how long the train is. I can adjust that from 400 to 800. These are the ones that come out of the drawers and go up onto the layout. I do that before the people show up. The first thing they usually do is they have to pick 1 or 2 cars off of one of the tracks from the yard they're in. And then they always say on this thing how long the train is at the end, as it's supposed to go to the next place, and how many tons it is. The tons is, pickups are all in green, set outs are all in red. They're all designated by the street that you're walking in. And there's labels on all fascias so that people know where they're at. Most of the industries have more than one door, and if they do, this tells them which door it's supposed to go, so they can't just free for all. It is in scale, and some people have a hard time seeing everything. So I tell them, hey, if it's a reefer and it's green, close enough. And when they get to to their destination yard, in this case, it's a UP yard because they started in the BNSF end, then they usually have 2 or 3 to set out. And then everything else goes to the drawers. And again, I usually do that. So once session's over, I usually take the cars and put them into the staging drawers. And then they take their locomotive back to the engine facility before signing out. That's it. Any questions?
Al, how wide is that elevator track? What I'm trying to guess is you're holding it up with one hand while you're reaching over for the latch with the other. How far stretch is it?
It's 1 track wide. It weighs quite a bit, but it's counterbalanced with 2 10-pound weights. So you can do it with one, you can raise it with 1 finger.
Al, this is Scott Buckley. What is your
Scott.
source? Hi, where's your source of for ballast?
Scenic Express.
And by the way, great presentation. I used to live in that area, so I'm somewhat familiar with the M&ET.
Is there anything here that would remind you of it?
Not really. I just know more of the history of it.
Okay.
Driven by, I know there's a lot there as far as a lot of industrial buildings.
So Al, this is John Bentz, and I just want to compliment you on what I think is a really creative solution for a small room. That's a great switching layout.
Thank you. Yeah, again, if a person doesn't like switching, they might want to come in and take a look at it, but then turn around because 3 hours of steady switching is a lot of switching.
Does the California Northern make it down to Modesto?
No, but I was reading something about the California Northern the other day. In fact, there was something in Railroad Model Craftsman about the California Northern this month.
Okay, I'll look for it.
Also, look for the April Railroad Model Craftsman. The cover article is on a layout that I get to operate once a month in Phoenix.
Bob Kenworthy, quick question. Back to the elevator. You've got the 3 drawer slides. How do you keep the elevator deck itself level?
Let me get back there.
How do you keep the elevator deck itself level?
It's bolted. Okay, so when I built this, the slider, I then took the moving piece and I used double-sided tape. I taped it to the back, pushed it up into the, anyway, it worked, but it's bolted on the back end, it's screwed in from the back side into the sliding part.
Okay, yeah, I can see now it's the plate where the handle is that keeps the thing from torquing up and down.
Right, in fact, I went with 3 of these because I wanted to make sure it didn't have any chance of doing any skewing.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
I had a 4th one because you buy them in pairs, and I probably should have gone ahead and used all 4 of them, but
it seems like a really good way of doing it. I've been fighting with the same question you have, which is I don't want to give up the square footage for Helix, but I got to get between decks and been looking at elevator possibilities. This is a simple and slick approach.
Those are exceptionally long drawer sliders, or are those 2 of them end to end?
No, I saw one.
Well, how long would that drawer be? Where would you have a drawer that long? Would take
I don't know. They're about 2 feet long, I guess. The back portion is about 2 feet long, I think.
Well, yeah, but it goes down below the slider.
It only had to go 16.5 inches. That's all I needed from top to bottom is 16.5 inches to go back and forth.
You can get them pretty long because I built a cabinet that comes out from behind a refrigerator for a friend of mine.
If you open a drawer that long in my kitchen, it would blow you right out the far wall and you'd be standing out on the porch.
Well, the key thing to notice is that the frame that's attached to the wall, you can't see it on the bottom. What you're seeing is the traveling part on the bottom.
Yeah.
The bottom hardware is not part of the main track. It's
right.
It's the traveling portion.
That's the slider. That's the traveler. Yeah. And then I ran the 10-pound counterweights on both ends over to the corners of the room. And again, you can lift it with one finger.
Rick Cooper here. Any train going off the slider would be backing up.
Right. I require them to always come in engine first.
Yeah.
So when they back out, they're backing out down a half inch and around the corner.
Did they do the rest of the switching on that level going backwards?
No, but when they come off of this,
They're backing.
they're backing up back into a 3-track yard. So
Okay.
they can back into the middle track and then run their local
And then
around
run.
how they need it.
Right.
And there's 3-track yard on the bottom and the top,
Right.
because I don't know where the people are gonna meet. If somebody's on the bottom and they're still futzing around and the top is already passed, anyway,
Yep.
it works pretty
It
good.
works. Yes. Good job. Nice presentation.
Thank you.
A couple questions here about your operation scheme. So you're using JMRI ops, which
Right.
we also use for our modular group, which it works great. How do you feel about JMRI ops versus car cards in regards to, like you said, you had some people come over and they couldn't finish the session, so you had cars all over the place. You had switch lists that were incomplete. And, with a car card system, you could just leave them like that and start over the next session and just take over where they left off. But with the JMRI setup, the way it's set up, everything wherever it's at, you have to basically start from that point over again, or you have to complete moving everything where it needs to go before you can start the next.
And that's what we do is I just move things where they belong and put the cars away. And part of the reason for not using the car cards and everything is because it takes aisle space, and I don't have aisle space. I mean, I'm lucky that 2 people can pass in my aisles. It's pretty tight, so I didn't want anything in the aisles like car card boxes and stuff like that. So no, I think the Operations Pro works fantastic for this kind of layout.
Yeah, it's good for this kind of thing. And then the other question I had was, I noticed how you have a switch list where it starts at a yard or something, but then you have several different industries you can go to, and they're packed pretty closely together. Do you require the operators to do everything in order, or can they do it any way they want to? Do they have to
Any
block all
order
the
they
cars?
feel like.
Block all the cars before they leave the yard area?
Here's a problem. The UP yard where one job starts is on the bottom, and the BNSF job starts at the top. It's on the same side of the room. I can't have 4 people on this small space. So the first thing the UP yard does is they take their train over to the far side into that 3-track yard and work their way back, while the top group pair works across. So the theory is that they're out of each other's way. That makes sense?
Makes sense.
Yep.
This is John Mick. I have a question for Al. Whereabouts
Yes.
in Tucson are you located?
Dove Mountain, just north of the mailing address is actually Marana, but it's up on the hill up above Marana, up on Dove Mountain.
Okay, I know about where you are.
Okay.
I'd like to throw in a personal also. Jacob Wright, how old are you now?
13.
13?
Yeah.
That's terrific. I remember when you kind of joined the group a couple of years ago with some just terrific modeling. Really good stuff. What are you working on now?
Well, right now I'm still working on my first layout. We pretty much completed the bench work. And still waiting on Walters for track. Slowboat from China took that quite literal meaning this time, but
Yes.
yeah, we're still waiting on that for starting our track work. But in the meantime, we've